See you now. Brilliant.
That's really fascinating.
Lovely. Oh, I'm so excited. I've been so looking forward to this, Ruth. I've been so excited to talk to you. Your research is fascinating. Yeah, reading your bio was just wow. And I had all these questions. But what I'm going to do is give you a chance to introduce yourself. And tell us a little bit about your research, because there's so many areas, there's so many buzzwords that you used in your bio, and I feel like I just want to jump in there, but I want to give you a chance to give the overview before, yeah?
Wow. So, well, really, as I said in my biography, I came upon genetics when I was a teenager. And as I said, this whole idea of it having the Janus-face, facing towards both catastrophe and utopia, and that double-sided nature of genetics really fascinated me. I mean, it as a science, it shares that capacity, say, with nuclear science, and really spawned a whole movement of responsible science, the realization that it wasn't enough just to invent and innovate. There was a certain responsibility to think about how novel discoveries and innovations would function in the world. And there used to be various movements, British responsibility in science, and more recently that's been taken up in the theme of responsible research and innovation. And clearly it's just as important today as it was when the concept first emerged back at the time in the context of nuclear science. So yes, I had a very interesting academic life, looking at a whole range of fascinating topics, including, for example, forensic DNA profiling, gene therapy, a vaccine against fox rabies, which has many things which are very relevant to what's happening today. So many interesting topics, and met so many interesting people from around the world through my work. And not for tonight, but another time, I think it would be really interesting to talk about science and yoga and genetics, because some thoughts have come to mind as we've been having discussions.
Definitely. In fact, I had picked up a few papers, or a few papers had come up, I think, a couple of years ago about yoga and genetics, and
really?
some yoga practices, select yoga practices and meditative practices were actually measurable at a the effects of those were measurable at a molecular level. So lots of fascinating things. And I think this is where, when you mentioned the Janus effect, looking forward, looking back. And then you talked about utopian and dystopian futures. And it makes, for me, this is so exciting, because when we think about, genetics, but when we think about practices that we teach, practices that we want to make our daily routines, etc., it's the same thing. We need to think about benefits and how they work and the long-term implications. And so for me, this is, when it comes specifically to yoga, this has been an important area to look at, because so much of, we're modernizing yoga. There's so much new practices coming in that is moving yoga away to a certain degree, in certain communities, away from its traditional roots. Now, when we look, and I'm glad, we really have to have that discussion about science and yoga, because when you look at the research into yoga, we're looking at traditional practices, and then when we look at what gets presented in the mainstream media, it's not exactly in keeping with those traditional practices. And so for me, the concern is, yes, as I want people to be innovative. I want yoga teachers to be innovative, but if you're going to innovate in a way that's disruptive long term, what are the implications of that? Because the whole aim of yoga as well was human development. To a certain degree, human evolution. How can we create practices that ensure that we strengthen our bodies and minds in the right direction, so that we don't lose abilities that we have, and we develop some innate abilities that we may not be able to use at present.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so you know, everything you said to me. Now let's talk a little bit about the Janus-face effect. You know, the looking back and looking forward. You know, just give us. I think, you know, a lot of people when they see your bio are going to pick up on those two, on Janus-face and then the utopian and dystopian realities based on genetics and your research, and why they were so important to you as a teenager.
I think this idea of catastrophe, utopia, ingenious or genocidal, has always been there around the science of genetics. I mean, it promises so much in the realms of health and food and the environment and in energy, in crime detection, in so many fields. And yet, because it's such a personal kind of knowledge about a human being, it does need to be handled in extremely careful ways. There's always been a fine balance between perfection and discrimination, which has to be always looked at very sensitively. You know, the pursuit of perfection can also be a route to destruction, a rather careless with regard to diversity of life, for example, particularly in the human context. And those debates really don't go away. They arose with the origin of genetics, and they're inseparable from genetics. It's yes, it's something that genetics must never lose sight of as a science.
To always ensure that we have a diverse, and that's why, you know, diverse population, because, you know, when we talk about utopia, you know, is a utopian society sustainable? Because if we're all not, you know, if we're all in a place that's quite positive and we not have a lot of challenges, and I'm taking utopian society in a very superficial sense, right? The ideal place where everybody's needs are met, there aren't enough challenges, then we risk the chance of not developing and growing and becoming more robust and stronger. You know, do we become weaker in a utopia? I suppose that's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, yes. Well, I suppose, and really it's strange because to answer that question, I wouldn't really necessarily think about genetics. I would think more about some of the things that are very new to me, but I'm just beginning to read about with regard to Hinduism, and that, you know, there comes a time when, you know, having a pleasant life, having the pleasures in life, having success, and even having a virtuous and service-filled life can actually cease to be enough, and that one can be seeking more joy and maybe health and other things. So yeah, nothing becomes satisfactory forever. Possibly is possibly the reality. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. You know, and so how did you get into yoga? How did you first?
Well, it's I mean, this has been a very interesting opportunity for me just to reflect on my yoga journey. And in many respects, some of the things that you said earlier on about the proliferation of yoga and what then gets propagated as yoga is multiplied in this way, it may become diluted and far removed from its original strain. And I realize as I'm talking, I'm using various genetic tropes here about lineages and descendances. But I mean, I experienced probably yoga, as many people do, as something very far removed from its origins. And I can certainly speak for somebody learning yoga in this country and being interested, but I can actually testify how difficult it is for a person, even when motivated and interested, fully to appreciate why yoga is different. I mean, I know that I've heard you say yoga is similar, say, to Pilates, or some people would say ballet or gymnastics, but it's fundamentally different. And my yoga journey has definitely been an experiential realization of why yoga is different from other forms of physical exercise, and why it's not appropriate even to classify it with other forms of physical exercise, because my personal journey has literally been that journey. And I mean, my yoga journey only began in 2016, when up till then, I rejected doing yoga because I was very busy. And it wasn't that I didn't think I would like it and didn't enjoy the physical side of it, but it wasn't sweaty enough. And I felt if I've only got an hour to do a class, I can't do that one. I haven't got enough time to do yoga because it's not enough. And I don't think I'm unusual in feeling that, you know, if you've only got an hour, you've got to go and bash yourself about. And what happened in 2016 was suddenly I needed help. My body was hurting. And I, you know, the simple things, driving the car, getting out of bed, my body was just getting sore. And my partner, David, pointed me in the direction of a very extraordinary personal trainer who's in Bedford called Thomas Kaminsky, who himself is a yogi and gymnast and martial arts expert. And I've actually been, training is not the right word, I would call Thomas my teacher for the last few years. And he's a very intuitive teacher. I don't think any two sessions with him have ever been the same. And I wouldn't say, well, this is the interesting thing, have I been doing yoga with Thomas? Not in any way that you would recognize in terms of asanas. Occasionally we did, but we have been doing what I now call yoga with a big Y all the time, big yoga, but it never looked like yoga. But when I first went to Thomas, I was still working full time, and often when I went to him, I'd train early in the morning, and he would ask me to guide me through meditation or breathing. And although it was helpful, I really didn't understand how, I knew it was all of the same area, but I did not understand the connection. And so Thomas was the person who said to me, you need a daily practice, Ruth. You can't just pick this up when you need it and then leave it if you really want it to help you. And so because of that, I took his advice and began a daily practice, first of all with Headspace, which people may know, good old Andy, a good starting point, and then into the Insight Timer, and where I particularly like Tara Brach, very, very, very nice person. And but I mean, as I say, I still felt that meditation was a long way away from yoga. And along the way, I also was introduced to the Isha school through Thomas. And it was unavailable. I think I knew I wanted more, but it's quite hard to find the structure because gym classes are not the same. And Isha is here. There's Isha London. They run courses in Milton Keynes and Cambridge. And so I used some of the tools. I read some of Sadhguru's books. I even bought his cookbook. I learned the Isha Kriya meditation, which became my nightly meditation. And I also, because of my particular interest still in the physical side, I was interested in their Hatha yoga programs.
Yeah.
So I did the Surya Kriya, which is a form of sun salutation program. And I did that. And so my daily practice used to be Surya Kriya in the morning and Isha Kriya in the evening. And I was also began reading more. You know, you've mentioned James Mallison from SOAS and some of the other yoga studies people who Mark Singleton and Elizabeth de Michaelis. And and I had a plan. I got to the 2020 and I had a yoga plan at the beginning of the year, which was I wanted to do the yoga and meditation studies MA at SOAS in the autumn. I was going to do some more Isha Hatha yoga classes in April and July. And I was looking for another yoga retreat. I'd been on one in India. And that's how I came to discover you. Because I was doing my research for my 2020 yoga year. And I came upon your retreat and I thought, this looks exactly what I'm looking for. An authentic trip to India to do some real yoga and really appreciate what I'm doing, not just a yoga holiday. And as you know, I came along to your Mahashivratri festival.
The Mahashivratri event, yes, I remember that.
In February of last year. And my partner, I thought, yes, this is it. We're going to do this. We'll see if there's spaces. And then, of course, COVID came. And so everything went in a different direction. I mean, what happened was then, you began your iYoga program? I mean,
yes, I began that a month later. I think, we had the last live class that I did, or live presentation, was our Mahashivratri evening.
Yes.
Yes, and that was at the end of February.
That's right.
And we had a few other events planned and live classes, and those were all cancelled on the 24th of March. And because we cancelled all of that, I started the live iYoga program on the 24th of March last year.
Yeah. And because I was quite new to your circles, I wasn't aware that this was happening, but I began to be aware of, like, when I'd have my computer on, these little things would float up and say, Nitasha Buldeo is doing iYoga performance program number 24 or something. And my curiosity got the better of me, but it was quite late on when I actually tuned in and saw there was a whole program, which I started to do rather belatedly in probably late summer last year. And I worked my way through it, doing everything usually twice before moving on to the next week, and got to the end of it towards the end of the year, and then began again, started again at the end of last year. And then I would say 2021 for me has been truly transformative. It's been, I mean, and I'm not just saying this because I'm speaking to you. If I was speaking to anybody, I would be saying the same thing. It's iYoga has completely transformed me. And it was really a kind of very intensive experience that all happened this year. I was in the final month of the performance program, which is very much, moving into the mind area. And I was doing that. And first of all, we did the Yoga Nidra course, and then we did the chakra course combined with the philosophy, and everything just fitted. And I had a kind of almost a gestalt switch that happened to me, which is, I mean, when I discovered that really I was now into yoga with a big Y and not a little y. And I mean, and it's really, I changed my mind about yoga in that, to be honest, when I learned about the 8 limbs of yoga, I, like a lot of probably Westerners, it was like, oh, it's only one. Yoga is only one of the 8 limbs of yoga. What are the others all about? And for me, the asanas were always the main one, and it was disappointing there was so little about them in, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And I've changed my mind about yoga, but the reason why I've changed my mind about yoga is because yoga is literally changing my mind. And I'm really experiencing, without me, I've heard you talk about it, and I know that Patanjali talks, is the purpose of yoga is to quieten the mind, but I've actually can feel my mind is changing because of the practice of yoga. And that's been amazing. And it started with the Yoga Nidra, when we did the Yoga Nidra practice, and I realized that yoga was a tool for directly intervening with your mind and changing how it worked. And I experienced that, and it was very exciting to have that ability to experiment and to move forward. But with the other practices, you know, the things that you would say about bottom up and top down, I started to really understand how this would literally change my mind, in that, you know, the combination of, you know, the intentions and the breathing and the asanas and the focus and the meditation was changing the pathways in my brain so that I would actually become a different person. And so it was not only a way to change my mind, but change my life, change my future, in some respects, revisit and reorganize the past. And so, you know, asanas are important to me now, but they're not the most important thing. I mean, I find when I listen to the performance program, I sit down and really, really pay attention to your talk at the beginning. And every time I do, I get more from it about what you're doing in terms of bringing things up from the bottom up, moving your center of consciousness around the body. I mean, you will recall that I discovered through the chakra course that my center of consciousness was outside. It wasn't even in my body. It was outside and to the right. And so I had a lot of things to do. So, I mean, that's my yoga journey. It's really accelerated. And it kind of goes back to what you said near the very beginning about yoga in this country and today. I don't know what to say, in that it's taken me, in a way, you could say, been quite fast. It's only been 5 years, and a lot of it's happened very quickly. I think the iYoga program has accelerated it immensely. It's so well thought through. The more you do the program, the more you can really see how you've threaded the philosophy and the practices, and they're integrated and they're there. So I don't know what your plans are, Nitasha, in terms of taking this out more broadly, but I think we need you.
Thank you, Ruth. You know, it's when I did the iYoga online program, I taught the 12-week program at various, you know, to various participants. They were always live classes. And if you notice my first video, because all my iYoga classes were live on Facebook, so you get to see me, flaws and all. And for me, you know, that's really, really important as a teacher, you know, to allow my vulnerabilities, to allow me to come through. And when I started the online program, I had no idea as to how it was going to pan out, if I could transmit that message across. You know, I had believed a personal limitation was that I needed a live class. I needed participants with me in order for them to have the experience. And what the iYoga program, the Facebook program that we did, had taught me was that participants can engage with it at different levels. And you know, the aim of the program was, you know, it's suitable for somebody very new to yoga, or very advanced, because in every class I am bringing all 8 limbs. But if you just want to focus on the asana, you can do that. If you just want to focus on pranayama, you can do that, because it's all there. For me, it's very important as a teacher to always ensure that the 8 limbs are entwined, are interlocked. So every class contains all of that. So my plans going forward is, you know, I would love to share this program with as many people as are interested. Yeah, so I'm you know, I'm trying to understand how that can happen, you know, what needs to happen. For me, yoga is a lifelong practice. It's very important that everything is done authentically. It's you know, it's very personal. It has to be authentic. Because you know, exactly as you said, yoga has the power to change us fundamentally, our physical bodies and our minds. And when I teach, I'd never want to water that down. I want, you know, the full impact of the yoga to be there. And you know, that comes with responsibility, because you can alter, you know, fundamentally alter the way a person's life in teaching them. For me, it always, it has to be positive. And I honestly believe that the more we learn about ourselves, the more aware we become, the more positive our lives become. But I'm at a stage, in trying to figure out how I can take this out there while maintaining all the yamas and niyamas.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So so that's my yoga journey so far, and it's obviously, as you say, a work in progress, a never-ending work. But the big transition I've experienced is the one of appreciating how yoga works on the mind and changes your mind, literally.
Definitely, it's powerful, incredibly powerful, changing perception, changing our mind. It's and for me, I think the other thing that's quite important, which as a researcher yourself you'd appreciate, is for me, it's in as much as I believe in my practice and I've seen the benefits of a personal practice, for me, having objective data is important to a certain degree. So I do, while yoga is never a competition, yoga is not about focusing on the outcomes. I feel as a researcher and as a teacher, I like knowing that the program does have objective measures. So I was so grateful to you as well when you started, observing your data objectively as well, because it's always, I think we can read research papers, but when we see our own data, subjectively and objectively, that in itself is transformative.
That's right. I mean, I track my own data now, and I do small experiments. I do different practices before I go to bed. I try out different things, and then I look to see what happens. And I have some surprises. So my mind is still surprising me because it's responding in ways, not necessarily for me predictable ways, but it's responding to what I'm doing, which is really extraordinary.
And that's wonderful, because that's really what the very traditional yogis in the forests in India 2,000 to 3,000 years ago were doing. They were doing experiments on themselves, because yoga gives us the ability to do that. We have the most incredible kit on the planet. I mean, okay, some animals in certain areas may be superior to us, but we have a pretty incredible kit, this human body, and we get to observe it subjectively and objectively. Incredible research, on ourselves. It's wonderful. And yoga gives you the tools to do that, but also to steer your growth, changes, transformation in directions that you want to, because by you observing yourself, you can see the changes you want to make, the practices that are, this really works for me. Exactly. Your yoga is the big why yoga. It's yours.
That's a good way of putting it. The why is for yours. Yes. Yeah.
When the big why becomes, when the why becomes a big why, it's your yoga. It's very, and as a teacher, I think that is the most satisfying feeling, when you see that change, where the yoga turns from the small why to the big why. It's like that aha moment. For me, it's just, this is why I do it.
Yeah. So so I don't know what happens next. I'm just going to carry on with what we do, looking out always for whatever you're coming up with as new courses. And
so going forward, with me right now, it's about helping each person who has gone through the various program develop their practice. In your case, it is now your practice, and I just have to find a way to to support you along the practice. I think this is now where I see my role, supporting you along your practice. So for me, that as well, it's the very exciting part of the journey. It's the reason I used to do retreats in the past, and I do these themed retreats, is basically to bring participants together, and to allow them to experience their yoga with the big Y, in a very special setting, because that's when we start to see how, even though it's our yoga, it's deeply personal, how various environments impact our practice. And I tend to choose places that have a significance energetically, or spiritually, whatever it is, but enable people to, for me, I think it's coming back to those aha moments. It's gently deepening your practice, because it doesn't end. For me, there's no final goal to yoga. It's a spiral, and it's, you're evolving, and every time you evolve, you actually look back and you think, well, I thought I got it then, but there's more to it. There's more. And it's just wonderful to understand just how amazing every single human being is, because we all have these bodies that can achieve these things. We all have minds that work in very, very unique ways. And for me, the other thing that's special about retreats and workshops, etc., is the sharing of experiences. Yes. Because sometimes you need somebody to say something, and it just unlocks something for you. It gives you that aha, eureka moment. It's just, suddenly that makes sense. And it's not always the teacher. It's, it's the energies coming together. It's the group coming together. So for me, that's the next, that's the important bit, going to creating the Sangha, creating communities of practitioners who want to explore their own bodies, because then you're a yogi, right? You're people, yogis who want to come together, support each other, create a very, very supportive community where we can develop, and each person can go as far as they want to go in it, and unlock more and more of their potential.
I mean, I think it seems to me, and not speaking from a great deal of a knowledge base, but it seems to me that what you're doing, though, is highly original. Your eye yoga that you teach, and the way that you are integrating the 8 limbs into the yoga practice is really quite phenomenal. And the more I have learned about yoga philosophy, the more I can see what you've put into it, how rich what you're doing is. So as I say, it seems to me what you're doing is incredibly original. And, that combined with the partially enforced shift onto creating an online community is a very interesting emerging frontier that's happening here. You've talked about your community. You have a word for it that you've, what's the word?
Sangha.
Sorry?
The word is Sangha, yeah?
Sangha. Yes. So we're living in an interesting time, and so you are, as I say, circumstances has forced this move onto online, but actually increases the reach. And as you say, with the eye yoga performance program, it works beautifully well as a video. And I think the fact that you did record it in one take live at a certain time every day, morning or evening, also brings something to it. It began and it ended in real time. There was something quite Greek about it, a unity of time and place, and that was it. And I think that also works really well. It's we move through it with you day by day, even if we're doing it 6 months or a year later.
It's about these moments, right? These moments that are transformative. And for me, that continuity of these moments that emerge, that result. I don't know how to actually, I don't know the correct word to use it, but very often when we have these aha moments, and And only when we have the moment, then we realize it seems like it's sudden. But when we reflect back, we can see the graduation. We can see how we got there. And I think for me, going through the process on a daily basis, because, like everybody else, it was a very, very challenging period for me as well. We just gone into lockdown, not really knowing what to expect. And so I didn't think of it at that time, but in terms of timing, it was working through so many emotions that we go through, at different periods in our lives. And so when I started, towards the middle half, when we start talking about the mental aspects, emotional aspects, and start talking about anxiety, etc., that was at that time very, very real for me and the people that I was talking to. So for me, that was important. It's always important to do things live. It has to be live. And the one take is very, very important, because what you'll notice is, even though the chakra course was pre-recorded, it was pre-recorded in one take. Because if I make an error, because I almost feel like if there's a little slip up or an error, it's very important that participants understand the process, because that's how I teach. I have to feel it to teach it. It has to be very, very real. When I talk about being grounded, I have to be grounded. And if I'm not grounded, and I'm, and I bring that into the class as well. I want to show you what unbalanced looks like, because this is it. I'm unbalanced today. So I think, that's important in terms of authenticity, etc., because things do put us off balance in life. And yoga really is about, how do we find the balance? And so I want people to see that with me as well. Things face you, and this is how you ground. This is how you find the balance in real time.
Yes. And you've just reminded me of another dimension to that, which is that, how you were different every day, and you had to be who you were that day. And I think, as somebody following the course, I could do the same strength and sculpt 2 days in a row, and it would be like a completely different class. That's real. I hear different things, I feel different things. So that's another beauty of having something you can go back to. It makes you realize what a different body and mind you inhabit yourself every day. And I still now hear things on the tape that I haven't really noticed. And you say that at one point. You say, you will find when you listen to this again, you will hear something different. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. I've often wondered what your own yoga journey is, whether what you want to do yourself in life, beyond if there's a beyond this.
For me, the beyond this, I think, my yoga journey started in childhood. I've had a yoga practice from a very, very young age, a daily practice from the time I was about 7 or 8. Before that, I started about 4, but 7 and 8, it became a daily practice. And so for me, yoga is deeply personal. If I am feeling, if I'm starting a new project, I have my yoga class that I would type, a few exercises that I would do, because I know those are beneficial for me when starting a new project, just to get me going, get me focused, get me motivated. So for me, it's deeply, deeply, deeply personal. And for most of my life, I didn't think of myself as a teacher. I was first asked to teach a yoga class when I was 16. And I did that under the guidance of another teacher. And then again in my, when I was in my 20, and, yet again decided, well, I'll teach with other teachers, but I couldn't see myself as the teacher. I suppose, in one way I had been exposed to some incredible teachers. And at that stage, I could not see myself filling those shoes. I almost thought, well, I had to fill those shoes, and if I can't do it, then I'm not. It's not me. I can't do this. I can't fill those shoes, so I can't teach. And but you know, throughout my life, I'd had my teachers sort of tell me, well, it's time, you have to start teaching. And I'd always ask for more time. You know, I teach classes under their guidance. I'd go, but you know, I could not start teaching by myself. And then I think when my two worlds started coming together, when I started doing research into introspection and then looking at yoga, I think it suddenly made more sense to me. I found my niche. I found something that my teachers couldn't bring to the practice because they didn't have that sort of training. And it suddenly gave me a different perspective that they're amazing and I've learned so much from them, and I owe everything, you know, to the teachers, to the people who've guided me along my journey. But I've reached a point where I'm combining an aspect that they're not really combining, and it works. It works really well. It enables me to give instructions in a simpler manner. It enables me to bring down top-down processes, which were always there in yoga. It was just not presented in that manner. And that's when I think, after having conducted my research, I suddenly thought, well, I can do this. I can teach it this way. And then once again, you know, decided, well, I can teach it because I'm going to research it. I'm going to look at the effects of the practice. So yeah, and then and then I'd reached a point where I thought, well, actually, I'm comfortable enough doing this. And I have to say, Ruth, surprisingly, I first felt comfortable enough to bring this to the world. Because prior to 2016, I had taught in India, I taught in various ashrams, etc. But I hadn't taught yoga to the West. I hadn't taught yoga to friends outside a very traditional yoga setting. So most of my friends and colleagues knew that I practiced yoga, but not really that I was sort of teaching as well. And it was in 2016 that I decided to start bringing my yoga out into the public. So we both started this yoga journey at a similar time. And I taught my first class, live class in Bedford. That was outside an ashram setting, outside a research setting. It was sort of me saying, well, friends, this is me teaching you yoga, which was, a wonderful experience, because it suddenly enabled me to engage with people I'd had long-term relationships with in a very different manner. And, and seeing, from being the friend to becoming, to being the leader and then and the teacher in a certain way. It was something that I didn't know if I could handle. Could I navigate that relationship?
Hello.
I do apologize.
That's okay.
Zoom kicked me out for a couple of minutes. I'm not sure why that happened.
Oh, I thought sometimes Zoom has a limit of 40 minutes, I think.
I don't, because I have the package that should allow me to do this.
Oh no.
I'm not sure, but it actually didn't kick me out. I just lost my connection. So it's not really Zoom, it's probably just my Wi-Fi connection.
Oh, because you froze.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know if you could hear me.
I just froze. It froze. I couldn't hear you. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Okay. So, but what we were talking about, I think, was your yoga journey. And I thought that was really fascinating. And you have kind of answered a question I asked early on, which is, I mean, your yoga is unique. The eye yoga is something which you have created. And I mean, I think that's why you teach it so well, because you fundamentally know exactly what you're doing. It's you. It's your yoga with a big Y and two A's.
Yeah, so a lot of the yoga bit comes from training, comes from my teachers. But I think the presentation, the putting it together, the asanas, that it's my research, it's mine. So the entire program I have created it based on research. Although it would not exist without my training in yoga. So it's combining. So for me, it's almost combining everything that I've learned with my research and with my sort of everyday work. The two worlds, my two worlds, sort of came together, and our yoga program is the result.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, yeah. So well then, I think we've probably reached the end of our allotted time.
A lot of time, yes. Well, thank you, Ruth.
Well, thank you very much.
We've had a lot of questions. We've had a few questions that had come up.
Okay.
Yeah, with regards to epigenetics and yoga. But what I think would be really interesting is for us to schedule another time where we talk. I mean, if you want to say something about epigenetics and yoga, epigenetic changes, etc., you're welcome to do so. But I would love to have that second discussion, science and yoga.
I would like to do it that way, and I'm glad that that topic's been mentioned, because I have been thinking about that myself, but I don't want to go into it now.
Yeah.
But yes, I have been thinking about, as I say, yoga and genetics and scientists and yoga. There's a kind of play around there, and actually I'm going to talk about a particular genetic scientist who will be very relevant to epigenetics, and she was a lady called Barbara Mcclintock, who really very early on saw that genes were mobile. But what was interesting is she saw that genes moved around in responses to challenges from the environment. And this was back in the kind of 30s, 40s, 50s, when genetics really couldn't hear that. It was outside the paradigm. And of course, this is very germane to the topic of epigenetics. But she was very interesting also because when I was listening to and participating in the yoga philosophy discussion we had, I recollected about her practice, which used the microscope. And when she looked at the chromosomes of the maize that she studied down the microscope, she was transported and became like a chromosome. And I thought, oh, this is so relevant to, and you know, she would talk about how she would just kind of lose time. And I think so that's what it's about. Scientists, it's about her genetics, it's about these questions. And there's something that I would also like to explore, which is that, you know, the way I think of genetics, it's this wonderful science that tries to explain two contradictory things, and that is how it is that organisms resemble their parents, and also how it is that they differ from them. Yeah. One theory explaining stasis and change. And I think that is the ingenuity of genetics. But when I listen to you talking about yoga, I hear it's trying to do the same thing. And so when you talk about, you know, we are the accumulation of our past, and you sometimes even talk in genetic terms, but we have the ability to change the future. You know, it seems to me that yoga is also doing this wonderful balancing act of explaining how things change and how they stay the same. So I think there's some really interesting intellectual kind of ping pongs happening.
Definitely, yes. You know, because exactly when I read your bio, to me it was saying what yoga was saying, because there's such interesting things. Exactly, you know, stasis and change. You know, and how we're it's a balancing act, very personal balancing act, but also, you know, when we think about science and where we're going in terms of transhumanism, etc., we have to be very wary of that balancing act.
Okay, and you've just, I mean, I know that from what you said earlier about catastrophe and utopia, the Janus-face, I think that could be, and you've just mentioned transhumanism, so I think we could actually put together a really interesting session.
Ruth.
Yeah, and so I'd like to give that more thought, and really, and also interested to see what people's questions are, yeah, genetics and yoga.
I think that's a fascinating subject. I am, it is so fortuitous that you're on this program, that you're willing to have this discussion and you're willing to explore this as well. So I'm looking forward to that discussion.
Me too.
Yeah.
And so, yes, so please keep your questions coming in, and we'll have a session on genetics and yoga.
Definitely.
Or yoga and genetics.
Definitely. And we'll give participants a chance to come up with questions, etc. We're going to have a really fabulous live session. Well, thanks, Ruth. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you. It's been delightful. And I'll see you down the tube.
Yes, we'll see
on Monday.
The live classes. So take care. See you soon.
All right then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.